The Red State Murder Problem. This is a report by thirdway.org, published on March 15th, 2022, written by Kylie Murdoch and Jim Kessler. I stumbled across this story. I did not find it. It's not something that I go searching for because I do not just like getting confirmation for the things I already believe. I actually like challenging information, challenging my mind, and learning new things. And anybody who disagrees with me, you're more than welcome to come on my channel and we can actually have a serious discussion, not a debate, because we are talking to try to find some level of truth, and it's somewhere in between both of us. But I will say this, since I've started my YouTube journey, trying to really go hard covering a topic that I care deeply about, which is gun violence in America, the constant mass shootings that take the lives of so many Americans every year. I constantly get two comments in my channel all the time. Number one, that I'm a Democrat. I am not a Democrat. I've said this multiple times in a video. Please go watch my past videos to understand my political views. I'm probably your worst nightmare. I'm a globalist, anarchist, socialist. Definitely not a Democrat, though I did register as a Democrat in Florida the last time I voted for the presidential election. But I do not personally identify as a Democrat, but that's neither here nor there. Secondly, I constantly get in my comments all the time whenever there's a mass shooting in Philadelphia, Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago, the right wing's favorite city to bring up. I always get this comment that this is a problem in blue cities or blue states or gun-free zones and all the other talking points that continually come from the dumbest of rednecks that exist in America and the dumbest of Second Amendment advocates who live in America. And this is a myth. America is a country built on myths. Myths created the country. Myths maintain and sustain the country, and they live in the hearts and minds of all Americans. All Americans, to some degree, believe in some myth that we've been told. For example, the myth that the American dream is available to all. If you just work hard and pull yourself up by your bootstraps, buddy, you can do anything you want in this country, which is a lie. We live in a capitalist society which regularly does not allow people to rise above their means. Secondly, another big myth that we've been all fed since we're very young is that the gun makes us free. Having the gun creates a safer, better society for all of us, and it guarantees us the rights that we have. Without the gun, we would be taken over by totalitarians. We would have a fascist dictator. We would not be able to fight against a tyrannical government that will come and hurt us, as if the US government has never hurt us. Telling this to a black American, yes, we need to fight against a tyrannical government with arms. Yeah, no, that's not going to work, and that wouldn't help. So we have to attack this myth, this second myth that sustains the first myth that the gun creates a safer society, that this only happens in certain segments or parts of the country or certain parts of a city. Many people believe when they hear about stories of gun violence or mass shootings, if they only look at the titles of the headlines that come out, mass shooting here, 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 and there, that this only happens in the bad part of town or the hood or the ghetto. Meanwhile, if you really watch the videos that I've been making covering the mass shootings as they come, not sugarcoating them, not selecting which ones to cover, covering every single mass shooting that happens, they happen all over the country to all sorts of people: white people, black people, Hispanic people, Asian people, the suburbs, the hood, schools, churches, supermarkets, of course, 4th of July parades. Everywhere you can imagine there has been gun violence and a mass shooting, and it needs to stop. It's unsustainable. It's embarrassing that this happens in the richest, greatest, most powerful nation in the world, and we can't even protect our citizens. So I will quit ranting right now. I will attack this myth, and before you leave a long, hateful, bigoted, stupid comment, how about you listen to the takeaways first? Now, I have not read this article in its entirety in advance. I am learning to read. I am reading to learn. I am not learning to read. I already know how to read, but some people who already don't like me will say, oh, this idiot is learning how to read. Whatever, take it out of context, whatever. I'm going to continue. Anyway, takeaways. The rate of murders in the U.S. has gone up at an alarming rate. But despite a media narrative to the contrary, this is a problem that afflicts Republican-run cities and states as much or more than the Democratic bastions. In 2020, per capita murder rates were 40% higher in states won by Donald Trump than those won by Joe Biden. 8 of the 10 states with the highest murder rates in 2020 voted for the Republican presidential nominee in every election in this century. Now, I'm going to attack this right before anybody can say it. This will be one of the last things I'll say before I get deep into the article. Many people who will read this will say this section of the country, from Texas, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia, all this southern part of the country, this is the blackest part of the country. And they'll say the violent crime rate is up, the gun violence rate is up in this part of the country because there's a lot of black people there. If you say that, automatically, you are a racist, first and foremost, because black people are not inherently violent. We are not prone to more violence than other groups of people. What really happens in the South is that this is the poorest part of the country by every metric and standard. I am from Louisiana, the second or the very last, I don't know, however you want to define it. It's either the first in poverty or the second in poverty. In Louisiana, we have a joke. We would be last if it weren't for Mississippi, because Louisiana ranks behind every other state in the country when it comes to outcomes in education, wages, housing, everything like that. It has nothing to do with there being a lot of black people here. It has everything to do with there being poor people there. Now, some people will say, well, there are poor people in all the other places in America. Yes, because there are a lot of poor people everywhere in America. And that's something else that needs to be done. And gun violence affects all parts of the country. But it has nothing to do at all with the fact that there are a lot of black people in the South. Because if you believe, well, it's just because there's so many blacks in blacks. I hate that. Why do white supremacists use that term, blacks? Anyway, it's because there are so many poor people in the South. That's all I'll say. I'll continue reading. All right. Every news outlet, from Fox to CNN to the New York Times to local newspapers, has a story with attention-grabbing headlines like U.S. cities hit all-time murder records. Fox News and Republicans have jumped on this and framed it as a Democrat problem. They blame it on Democrats' soft on crime approach and have even referred to a New York district attorney's approach as hug a thug. Many news stories outside of Fox have also purported that police reform is responsible for this rise in murder and have pointed to cities like New York and Los Angeles. This is a measure of truth to these stories. The U.S. saw an alarming 30% increase in murder in 2020. While 2021 data is not yet complete, murder was on the rise again this past year. Some blue cities like Chicago, Baltimore, and Philadelphia have seen real and persistent increases in homicides. These cities, along with others like Los Angeles, New York, and Minneapolis, are also in places with wall-to-wall media coverage and national media interest. Now, I'm just a simple man on YouTube. I'm just a simple guy. But what they're saying in this article here makes a lot of sense. In this report, of course, what happens in Chicago, Baltimore, Philadelphia will be blasted out to the rest of the country because these are major metropolitan areas with the media industry embedded in those cities. Meanwhile, when I talk about the stories about what happens in North Dakota, South Dakota, South Carolina, North Carolina, Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, rural parts of Texas where there's a mass shooting where 8 people got shot or 10 people got killed, 4 guys found in the back alley of some place in Wisconsin or Illinois, right? That does not get mainstream media attention. I cover that on my channel because all lives matter. We should care about all Americans regardless of where they live. But as we know, mass shootings, gun violence only hits mainstream media attention when the crime that's being committed is so heinous that it warrants their attention and they can't ignore it. But it literally goes on every single day across the country. Every single day there is a mass shooting. There's been over 700 mass shootings in 2022 alone. The majority of them do happen in red states, red counties, rural areas, not the big cities. This is a fact. This is a fact. Please look at the other videos and the statistics on gun violence. But what I'll say here, and And I'm willing to have my facts challenged. If this report says something different, I'm willing to change my mind. But I hope you guys are as well. Anybody who's watching this video, please have an open mind when you're going in thinking about this. Because I'm not talking about how many dogs are ran over in the streets every year. I'm talking about how many Americans are killed every year by gun violence, something very preventable. I'll continue. But there is a large piece of the homicide story that is missing and calls into question the veracity of the right-wing obsession over homicides in Democratic cities. Murder rates are far higher in Trump-voting red states than Biden-voting blue states. And sometimes murder rates are highest in cities with Republican mayors. For example, Jacksonville, a city with a Republican mayor, had 128 more murders in 2020 than San Francisco, a city with a Democrat mayor, despite their comparable populations. In fact, the homicide rate in Speaker Nancy Pelosi's San Francisco was half that of House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy's Bakersfield, a city with a Republican mayor that overwhelmingly voted for Trump, yet there is barely a whisper, let alone an outcry, over the stunning levels of murders in these and other places. Last time I was in Jacksonville, there was a shootout. I went to Duval for a rap battle, and one of the battle rappers who was white faced another famous battle rapper who was black, and they had a shootout in the parking lot, which goes to show, once again, stupidity knows no color in America. We collected 2019 and 2020 murder data from all 50 states. Comprehensive 2021 data is not yet available. We pulled the data from yearly crime reports released by state governments, specifically the Department of Justice and Safety. For states that didn't issue state crime reports, we pulled data from reputable local news sources. To allow for comparison, we calculated the state's per capita murder rate, the number of murders per 100,000 residents, and categorized states by their presidential vote in the 2020 election, resulting in an even 25-25 split. We found that murder rates are, on average, 40% higher in the 25 states Donald Trump won in the last presidential election compared to those that voted for Joe Biden. In addition, murder rates in many of these red states dwarf those in blue states like New York, California, and Massachusetts. And finally, many of the states with the worst murder rates like Mississippi, Kentucky, Alabama, South Carolina, and Arkansas are ones that few would describe as urban. Only 2 of America's top 100 cities in population are located in these high murder rate states, and not a single one of the top 10 murder rate states registers in the top 15 for population density. So as I said earlier, the majority of these shootings are happening in rural America, poor America, working class America. It's not happening in Chicago. It's not happening in LA or New York or Philadelphia, even though the murder rate is very high there, even though the gun violence rate is very high there. Trust me, I cover it on my channel. I talk about it on my channel. I do not try to cape for the Democrats because I'm not a Democrat, and I don't care about Republicans because Republicans are evil. But I'll say this. Once again, I just want to make this point very clear. I'm not here trying to villainize the red states, even though I just said Republicans are evil. What I am trying to do is point out the big problem of the hypocrisy of the myths that we tell ourselves. That when we look at somewhere else in the country, we say that place over there is where those people who have different views are doing the things that I don't like. Meanwhile, me being a responsible gun owner, am not a part of the problem. But both of you guys, on the other side, the guys you're pointing at and you are giving money to the gun lobby by paying for these bullets, paying for these guns, which then perpetuates the continuing cycle of guns flooding in America, allowing more and more and more murders and shootings to happen. Not in that guy's part in Chicago that you're pointing at, but in your backyard in Arkansas, buddy. That's what I'm saying. Whether one does or does not blame Republican leaders for high murder rates, it seems that Republican office holders do a better job of blaming Democrats for lethal crime than actually reducing lethal crime. Trump voting states account for 8 out of the 10 highest murder rates in 2020. If you're tuned into the media, you'd think murder is rocketing skyward in New York, California, Illinois, but those states don't even crack the top 10. In fact, the top per capita murder rate states in 2020 were mostly those far from massive urban centers and Democratic mayors and governors. 8 of the 10 8 of the top 10 worst murder rate states voted for Trump in 2020. None of those 8 has supported a Democrat for president since 1996. The chart below shows the top 10 murder rate states in 2020. Mississippi had the highest homicide rate at 20.5 murder rates per 100,000 residents, followed by Louisiana at 15.79. Kentucky at 14.32, Alabama at 14.2, and Missouri at 14. The national average was 6.5 per 100,000 residents, but the top 5 states had rates more than twice that high. Another sick thing about American society is that many Americans like to brag about the murder rates. You know, one of my favorite rappers, one of my favorite rappers from Louisiana, Lil Wayne, once had this line where he said, "We're from the murder cappy, brother, we murder happy." And when I think about and reflect on my life and the things that I grew up listening and believing, we used to be a bit proud in Louisiana that we came from a place that was so violent and dangerous and deadly and poor. And it was something that we sort of put on our backs to make us feel tougher. But it's really backwards. It's really dumb. It's really stupid to be proud that your state has a high murder rate, that we come from the murder cappy. That's nothing to be proud about. I'm thankful every day that I made it out alive. There's so many times in my life where I think back and imagine, yeah, that could have ended deadly. That could have ended like this or that, right? And I'm not even from the hood. I'm not even from the trenches or the trap like that. You know what I mean? But when you grow up in Louisiana, when you grow up in America, you're around gun violence every day. It can literally affect you at any place at any time. And especially coming from Louisiana, it does. And this is nothing to be gloating about. It's something to be ashamed about. Is the point I'm trying to make. These red states are not generating "murder is out of control" national headlines. They seem to generate no headlines at all. The rest of the top 10 were filled out by South Carolina, New Mexico, Georgia, Arkansas, and Tennessee. All states rarely talked about in breathless media reports about rampant crime in Democratic strongholds. Notably, New Mexico and Georgia were the only Biden voting states in the top 10, and they ranked 7th and 8th respectively. Top 10 murder rates in the United States. The first state, Mississippi. Second, Louisiana. Third, Kentucky. Fourth, Alabama. I was born in Alabama. Fifth, Mississippi. Sixth, South Carolina. Seventh, New Mexico. Eighth, Georgia. Ninth, Arkansas. And 10th, Tennessee. 5 of the largest Biden voting states by population, and those often in the news when it comes to crime, had much lower murder rates. New York at 4.11 per 100,000 residents, California at 5.59, and New Jersey at 3.70 were each well below the national average. Now, I'm not saying here that New York and California are great places, because there are countries that have murder rates way below the U.S. And I'm not talking about third world countries. I'm talking about countries in Western Europe, the places that we should be better than, or at least on par with. Canada does not have a murder rate of 4.11. California does not have a murder rate. Spain does not have a murder rate of 5.59. Germany does not have a murder rate of, 3.70, right? How come in the United States our murder rates are still so high? Yes, we are a large country. There's almost 400 million of us. But why do we always have to live in fear of gun violence? Why do we have to have so many murders? It does not need to happen. It does not need to happen. We need to actually have serious gun control in America to actually lower the amount of people hurt by gun violence. Pennsylvania, 7.22, and Illinois, 9.2, were higher than the national average. But Mississippi's murder rate was nearly 400% higher than New York's, more than 250% higher than California's, and about 120% higher than Illinois's. In fact, the 5 states with the highest murder rates, all Trump voting states, had rates at least 240% higher than New York's murder rate, and at least 150% higher than California's, the homes to some of the largest cities featured prominently in the "crime is out of control" narrative. Now, I think the "crime is out of control" narrative, coming from the right or the conservatives, is coming from how brazen sometimes the crimes that happen in New York, Chicago, and LA are, right? Like, they're caught on CCTV, right? And the CCTV, and these things go viral on the internet, and we're all seeing these things coming out of LA. I'll be honest with you, when I went to LA the first time, I was a bit afraid because of all the stories I've heard about people, wearing the wrong color, getting hurt and stuff, and just being in the wrong place at the wrong time, because LA is just a different animal. We all saw P&B Rock get deleted this year when he went to LA, right? So, yes, different places have different rules, and in a lot of these big cities, the crime that does happen, the violent crime that does happen, is caught all on video, and then that spreads out to the rest of the country. But like we covered before, right? Unless Simon Hill talks about the mass shooting that happened in, I don't know, North Dakota yesterday, nobody would probably hear about it besides the 4 or 5 people that watch the local news in somewhere in North Dakota, right? What I'm trying to say is that we should have more attention paid to the gun violence that happens in America, because it's an embarrassment that this continues to happen. It's a shame that this continues to happen. How many more Americans have to die before we actually have some sensible, reasonable gun control? I'll continue. All right, 2020 murder rates are 40% higher in Trump voting states compared to Biden voting states. Beyond the top 10, we looked at the 2020 murder rates in the 25 states that voted for Donald Trump and compared it with the murder rates in the 25 states that voted for Joe Biden. The 8.2 murder rates were 100% residence rates per 100,000 residents rate in Trump states was 40% higher than the 5.78 murders per 100,000 residents in Biden states. These Biden voting states include the crime is out of control cities like Los Angeles, New York City, Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, Portland, Baltimore, and Minneapolis, among other large cities. Among the 50 states, murder rates were often well above the national average in many Republican-controlled states and cities. Jacksonville, with 176 homicides and a murder rate 19.776, more than 3 times that of New York City, 5.94, has a Republican mayor. Tulsa, 19.64, and Oklahoma City, 11.16, have Republican mayors in a Republican state and have murder rates that dwarf that of Los Angeles, 6.74. Lexington's Republican mayor saw record homicides in 2020 and 2021 with a murder rate 10.61, nearly twice that of New York City. Bakersfield, 11.91, and Fresno, 1409, each have Republican mayors and murder rates far higher than either San Francisco or Los Angeles. Of course, some cities controlled by Democrats have alarming murder rates, like Chicago, 28.49, and Houston, 17.32. But we hear about these and other Democrat-run cities all the time. We aren't getting the whole picture. Here's a chart. The average murder rate is 40% higher in Trump voting states. So, Mississippi is here, LA, Kentucky, of course. And when we compare this to the highest Biden voting states, it's almost double, right? Look at here. Mississippi, 20.5, New Mexico, 10.7. Between 2019 and 2020, murder rates increased slightly faster in Trump voting states than Biden voting states. In 2020, murder rates increased nearly everywhere, but they increased more in Trump voting states than Biden voting states, albeit slightly. The average increase in murder rate across all Trump voting states was 32.2% compared to 30.8% in Biden voting states. 3 out of the 5 states with the highest murder rates in 2020, Mississippi, Missouri, and Alabama, didn't have reliable 2019 data available, so they weren't included in this analysis. 3 of the 5 states with the largest increase in murder rates were Trump voting: Wyoming at 91.7%, South Dakota at 69%, and Nebraska at 59.1%. These states are decidedly rural and do not conform to the chaos in the city meme that has overtaken the crime debate. Biden voting Wisconsin came in at number 3 spot at 63.2%, and Minnesota came in 5th at 58.1%. Out of the top 10 states, 6 were Trump voting states, with the additional 3 being Kentucky, West Virginia, and Kansas. The remaining states in the top 10 were Delaware and Washington. Only one of the top 10 states in murder rate increases, Delaware, was among the top 20 in population density. Top 10 murder rate increases in the United States. I think that's Wyoming, South Dakota, Wisconsin. What's NE? I forgot what NE is, but Minnesota is MN. KY is Kentucky, DE, Delaware, Washington, West Virginia, and Kansas. Again, California, New York, and Illinois aren't in the top 10. California's murder rate increase was 31.1%, or about the national average. Both New York, 45.8%, and Illinois, 38.2%, were above the national average. Here's a map showing where the increase in murder rate is happening. The majority are Trump voting states. So here's the conclusion. The current narrative around crime and murder is convenient and wrong. Whether you're watching CNN or Fox News or getting news online or from a traditional newspaper, you would think that the increase in murder is a phenomenon found mostly in liberal cities. Many have tried attributing this increase to Democratic policies, specifically police reform. Republican lawmakers and ad makers have contributed to this narrative through clever messaging and strategies. But the data clearly paint a different story. The increase in murder is not a liberal city's problem, but a national problem. Murder rates are actually higher in Republican Trump voting states that haven't even flirted with ideas like defund the police. 8 of the 10 most lawless, high murder states are not only Trump voting states, but GOP bastions for the last quarter of a century. A more accurate conclusion from the data is that Republicans do a far better job blaming others for high murder rates than actually reducing high murder rates. I will put the methodology in the description box for anybody who wants to read that. So, in conclusion, I think the truth of the matter is that regardless if the murder rates are lower in blue states or if they are not increasing as fast in blue states compared to the rest of the country, the United States of America has a gun violence problem, period. I'm still getting this from this text. The only way, in my mind, to solve this problem is to have extreme gun control, ideally to abolish the Second Amendment. How else could we have a country where people are expected to live freely, to not have to look over their shoulders, look over their back, take extra precautions, in a country that continues to allow weapons of war, weapons meant to kill people, on our streets? This does not have to happen. Just look across the border in Canada. This is almost unheard of. My name is Simon Hill. Thank you for watching.